Guys, welcome back to Breakthrough Conversations. My name is Brett English, and tonight we have a special guest all the way from Canada. It is at Yamsocks, it's Yamsox on TikTok, with more than 500,000 followers, more than 6 million likes. This man, the only way I could describe him would be if Jesus Christ and Isaac Newton had a child, it would be this guy. The way he describes mathematics, metaphysics, and spirituality is so freaking beautiful and is absolute magic. So stick around, watch the whole thing. You guys will absolutely love it, and this will blow your mind and expand your consciousness like never before. At Yamsocks at TikTok, get on it. We'll see you soon. Soon. Yeah, fuck that up. But anyway.
Can I ask, what actually sparked your mind to...
Sparked the mind?
Yeah, early on. Was it something you did in childhood that sort of made you think this way, or did it happen quite recently or quite sporadic?
I think there have been a couple instances where, I could really point it down to something that like sparked it. But of course, in general, it's been more of like a gradual increase. When I was 3 years old, I remember laying down on the pillow next to my mom and hearing like my heartbeat from a vein touching the pillow. And like for some reason it dawned on me then. I was like, that's going to stop one day. And like that freaked me out, especially for a 3-year-old. And so I've been kind of subtly aware of mortality ever since I was quite young. And that definitely, I feel like, creates a certain dynamic in the mind. But
that's deep as fuck. Can you imagine being a 3?
yeah, I know, right?
So like, yeah, like
yeah. And one of my other favorite memories was the scientist came to my school in grade 1. And I don't remember what type of scientist, it's a pretty broad label. And they were just describing what it was to be a scientist and what science was. And we were all getting interested on like what kinds of science. And we were just throwing buzzwords out like rocks. And she'd be like, yeah, geology, there's a science of rocks. It was so cool to learn like there was a science about everything. But I remember putting up my hand, and for some reason or another, like I had the question, what about the science of nothing? And the teacher the scientist didn't understand, like, what do you mean? And I was trying to get across, like an actual science about like the nature of nothingness is how I would have articulated today. But of course, I couldn't in grade 1. But I think that goes to show that for some reason or another, I've always been fascinated with like the abstract and the subtle nature of things and the meta of it all.
Yeah,
wow.
I'm sure that scientist would have gone home and pondered that.
Yeah.
I hope so.
Or maybe not.
Let's drive home. Like,
now, sorry.
Yeah, because that's a very it's a very interesting question to ask a scientist. You know what I mean? Because I think when it comes to like at least the scientific realm, everything is always all about like is very attached to like the material realm. Like they don't really think about anything beyond that. So asking a scientist about the nature of nothing is like it would be so out of their like realm of kind of like, it's not understanding. It's just kind of like it'd be so out of the ordinary because they would have never pondered that. They would have never taken the time to just be like, okay, all right, holy shit, what is the science of nothing? That's
well, science is typically about things.
yeah, exactly. Science is all about like the material. We haven't really delved into like the kind of science that Tesla was kind of trying to touch on. I think he was the first person to kind of touch on like that deeper like frequency level of science, but we kind of just shun that. And I think that's where we need to get to. And I think it'd be interesting to see where do we go with that. And like, at 3 years old, like when you were having that thought, like this is gonna stop one day.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't ask how it changed your life, but like what impact did that have on you?
Well, I mean, it got me thinking about death. And death is such an interesting object of meditation because you focus on death, like a lot of insights arise. At some point in my life, eventually that led to another big moment. I was outside, I was staring at the moon, and sometimes I have conversations with the stars just for shits. It's very like it's simulation, just going out and kind of Shakespearean. And I remember being like, okay, what actually is death, right? What is it the end of? End of the body or the end of the mind? Or what am I really afraid of losing? Is it the stories that have accumulated, or the things I've learned, or the friends I've met? And just that kind of discussion within oneself about death, I feel like is the real essence of philosophy and spirituality. And it's just so much revelations occur as a consequence of that.
Beautiful.
Beautiful.
So in these conversations with the stars, did it feel like it helped you, or you had certain epiphanies, or did you feel like looking out into the infinite cosmos expanded your own mind to be able to receive or channel or access hidden elements?
Most certainly. Yeah, I think that night, the biggest revelation that I had was also concerning the nature of nothing. Nothing has been a big little attribute of my life. And I was like imagining, presuming death leads to this vast, vast, eternal nothingness. I was like, what would that be like, right? Because it wouldn't be blackness or darkness or silence, because all of those are properties of nothing and not nothing itself. Or those are properties that nothing gives. Like if we have a box that contains nothing in it, we say that the box is empty or the box is void, but we never said anything if nothing was void or if nothing was empty. So if after death there is nothingness, then it cannot be absent, or it cannot be void or silent or blackness, because those aren't nothing. Those are the properties that nothing gives. So it dawned on me that truly nothing was stopping nothing from containing anything at all, or everything, in fact. And slowly I started piecing together that the true nature of nothingness is not emptiness, but not so different from what's around us right now, because all of this is contained within, space, within vacuum, within nothing.
It's going back to your video where the universe does not exist, but all that it contains does exist.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's a trip, man. I remember I spent some late nights looking at your videos and like, fuck is going on, Because I'm quite spiritual minded, but I've never really gone into like the paradoxes and the nothingness and the physics of it all. Is just wow, What got you into the physics side of things and the mathematics? Because you go pretty deep into that sort of stuff, and I've actually learned so much from your videos because I have no clue what you're talking about when I first started watching them, and I'm like, it actually makes sense by the end of it.
Well, there's many different pathways one can take on the spiritual journey, and the Yoga Sutras kind of enumerate different paths you can take. There's the path of Jnana Yoga, which is the pathway of knowledge to enlightenment, and that's through intellectual stimulation, through like physics and mathematics and whatnot. And that really inspired me, primarily because I wanted to know how it all works. Like everyone, you're born onto this rock, hurling through the void, and you're like, what? Like, how? Why? Where? And for what? And of course. And there's kind of like a hierarchy of the sciences. And if we start within the mind at psychology, we can kind of backtrack and abstractify and notice that psychology, well, that's essentially just applied neurology or sociology. And those are applied biology. And that's applied chemistry, and chemistry is applied physics. So as we trace down to get to the source of things, eventually at some point we hit physics. And that's pretty lower down in the chain. Physicists are searching for a so-called theory of everything to describe all the interactions in the physical world. And so that really sparked a curiosity in me that physics was so deep down the ladder. But one can go deeper. All of physics is described by what I call the language of the universe, or as most people call just mathematics. And so, of course, that's a deeper route. And that is built up upon logic. And logic is built on philosophy, and then we kind of loop again. We started at philosophy, and we ended at philosophy.
Yeah. I'm starting to see why, because I remember Plato, with all of his new recruits and students, the first thing he would teach them is mathematics, not philosophy, just to have a foundation. And I never really understood why, but now I'm sort of understanding as seeing your content. It's totally different. It's different to what I'm expecting. Yeah.
Yeah, I think like I think it was kind of like a similar route to me. Obviously not to the same depth as you, but like when you start kind of delving into like at mathematics and very superficial physics, it starts connecting things on a very different level. You know, like going from like going just from the physical to like going down into like atoms and all that stuff, and like how it all connects. It's interesting. You know, it makes you ponder. I think it was I'm not sure if it was Donald Hoffman. No, Donald Hoffman was a neurologist. There was a physicist who kind of found binary code in the structure of the universe. So it's just like, holy shit, is this the Matrix? Like, it kind of like added on to like the whole Matrix theory a little bit more. Yeah, like the whole holographic theory a little bit. And so what did you find around like mathematics and how it kind of structures the universe?
Binary
fractals,
yeah. It's funny you mentioned binary because like that's exactly it. It's such a fundamental thing, the concept of like zeros and ones, truthums and falsums. Like it's the simplest object besides something that is one, because you start at one, you get two. But in order for really science to be done, you need multiple things, and the simplest quantity that is a multiple is two. And of course, the reason that's important is because science is the study of like hypotheses and quantification. And you only ever need to query or to quantify things if there exists a possibility for multiplicity. Because if we query a set of selections and there's only one object, well, we'd never need to question because we already know the answer. But if there's multiple objects in a collection, then that's when a question is important, because then there's a choice. So the simplest choice that could be made is between two things, between a binary choice, if it was 0 or a 1, a yin and a yang, the duality at the heart of it all.
Wow, that's insane. Yeah, that's, again, never thought about it like that. Never thought about it like that. Yeah.
And you've mentioned that all knowledge or infinite knowledge already lies within us.
Sure.
How do we access that knowledge? Is there any shortcuts to this, or is it old-fashioned hard work?
I think my favorite way of describing the universe is set theory, which describes everything as collections of things and collections of collections. And that's a surprisingly powerful tool. So surprising, in fact, that so powerful that it's literally beyond infinite. Like the amount of possible combinations you could make with the concept of just sets and collections and things containing other things is literally beyond infinity. It's like beyond finite, but also beyond infinity. So because of that, it could represent anything and everything, including the universe. But the very essence of a set or a collection is nothing but like an acknowledgement. If I say like, hey, I've got a collection of shoes, all that really is a certain like envelope of awareness, an acknowledgement of those things. And every set within those sets are also acknowledgements. So secretly, set theory, and used to describe all of mathematics and the universe, is really a theory about how many ways awareness can combine with itself, how many ways we can combine acknowledgements and our awareness to knit together various things. And so when one puts it in that perspective, when the essence of all of the universe can be described in terms of awareness only, then of course we have the power to understand literally any aspect or truth about the universe, because we have awareness. And this awareness can combine with itself in a beyond infinite number of ways to access anything that you desire.
Beautiful. I love the way you articulate things, man.
Yeah.
So you can break down vast concepts to explain it to a child, aka myself.
We're all children.
to grasp that. Can I ask you what your thoughts are on the Bible and what you think the Bible originally was written for and made to try and express?
Yeah. I know in modern times, a lot of us see the Bible as kind of this like tool that was used to oppress. And certainly it has the power to do that. But I think deeper down that shows the true power of there's a certain like energy to religious texts because they inspire like not only millions but billions of people for thousands of years. So there's something very archetypal about the stories in the Bible, and truthfully, I think they're quite profound, but very easily misinterpreted. And I think the reason that the Bible, especially, can be so misinterpreted is because, thousands of years ago, when we had discussions about philosophy, we didn't have like the proper words to describe very complicated mechanisms or very intricate or subtle. So we had to use metaphors. Like today we have the word consciousness, but back then we could only describe it as like the breath. Like that's like the word for soul and spirit comes from the word breath. And so when we go to translate those old words today, we do a great job linguistically translating it, but we forgot their original meaning. Oh, now we're talking about breath and dividing the waters from the waters, but it was all a metaphor for philosophy because we just didn't have the words that we used to describe today back then.
Wow. Well, what are some of the biggest misinterpretations that you've seen in the Bible that you'd wish to correct?
I think my favorite is like the first line. And probably the most important line, Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And I could go on forever about that. I'll keep it short and sweet, though. But I think the biggest change I would make is that the Hebrew word, because the earliest version we have of it is in Hebrew on the Dead Sea Scrolls. And the Hebrew word for create is more accurately translated to discern, or like just an acknowledgement of a difference. And the words for heaven and earth come from the old words for like the elements, like water, fire, air, and of course earth. Earth is the earth, unsurprisingly. But heaven is in Hebrew is like it literally translates to water, air. So when we make those, when we plug in those back into the first line, we get that God discerned between water, air, and earth. And of course, I imagine the creation of the universe, the first things that didn't exist was air, water, or earth, because those are pretty complicated. These are more metaphorical and symbolical. Well, what is water and air if not fluids? And so we're comparing a fluid to something more solid. It's a discernment to be made between the form and the formless. So, thus, in my opinion, the first line of the Bible is really, in the beginning, a discernment was made between form and formless, existence and non-existence.
Would that be the creation of the elements as well, like discerning the elements, like ether being the heavens and earth being the actual earth? Or
sure, yeah, but in a more metaphorical way.
Yeah, that's beautiful, man. That really hits the Bible in such a better way than what I've been used to.
Yeah. How would you,
I think so too. Yeah.
How would you connect to those, the physics and the context of the Bible in sort of that context? In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. How would you explain it to someone in the most simplest way, kind of connecting science, physics, and the text itself?
Sure. I think we have a very similar explanation for the universe in according to our current theory, which is the cosmological something. It's a fun acronym that is our formal theory, which is essentially the theory of the Big Bang. And in its most distilled form is essentially that all things were one, the singularity at the beginning of the time. We have four fundamental forces now, but back then they were all unified as the grand unified force, and all of space and time were indistinguishable. It was just so infinitely homogeneous. The universe was nothing but a zero-dimensional point. And exactly what happened after doesn't particularly matter, but what did happen after is that there was a separation between everything, that we had a non-dual state of existence at the beginning of time, and then suddenly that changed into a dualistic existence where things can be differentiated from each other, and we have objects instead of a subject. That was the singularity.
Wow.
And do you think that was represented by the Big Bang? And what are your thoughts on the Big Bang? Is that a...
I think it's pretty. Of course, there's a lot of kinks to iron out. There's exactly how quickly it happened, or to what extent, and what time scale we have disagreeing measurements on. But we're pretty confident that, or physicists are, that at some point in time, all of the world lines between all the objects in the universe, they overlapped, and at the same point and at the same time. And so I do agree with that premise that there was kind of a local start to time.
Nice.
Oh, nice.
And
Yeah,
going back to the discernment in the beginning, and your video on heaven doesn't actually exist.
Yeah.
How would you sort of break that down or explain that to like a Christian person or trying to say, look, heaven doesn't exist? It's actually...
Yeah. I probably wouldn't say that because that's I wouldn't want to break anyone's paradigms down. But in fact, it's a really good thing that it doesn't, because it becomes more real. And when I say that something doesn't exist, now I don't mean that it's not real. I just mean it's just not an object, because objects are what comprise existence, but subjects are what comprise non-existence. And I think there's this direct correlation between this concept of divinity or God or higher power and the concept of non-existence. I think there's a one-to-one correspondence. We ask a physicist, a pretty skeptical physicist, what came before everything? Well, you don't have to be a physicist. You could just, nothing came before everything, like by definition of the word everything and nothing. Well, that's interesting then, that nothing came before everything. And a theist would tell you that God came before creation. And so there's kind of a one-to-one correspondence here between creation and everything, and a creator and nothing. And of course, if heaven is the kingdom of this God, the place in which it comprises, then namely the place of nothingness is nowhereness, it's non-existence. And that's not to say it's not real because it doesn't exist. It's just not an object, unlike every other object in this universe. It's just not a thing. When it's nothing, it doesn't mean it's not. It's just not a thing, right?
Yeah. 100%. Do you believe in, or what is your concept of a creator or God or source consciousness around those lines?
I think the pantheistic view is quite appropriate to assume that the creation unto itself is the creator.
Where God is in everything, God is in nature. Is that pantheism?
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
When we have, say, an artist and art, they kind of define each other. There is a closed loop, and the only real distinction between an artist and art is within the mind. And so for one to assume that God is separate from God's creation, well, again, that's like the distinction between an art and an artist. It's a distinction only within the mind.
I love that, because it reminds me of Michelangelo's painting where God is in a brain reaching out to Adam with the finger.
Oh, I love that. Yeah.
That's the first thing I thought of when you broke that down. Can you tell us about the cosmological constant?
Oh, of course. Yeah. That's a classic number. I think it's about 0.9 something. But it's like it holds the power to the fate of the universe. If it's too big, the universe rips itself apart. That's the big rip. If it's too small, then the gravity takes over and it all crunches, the big crunch. But if it's just right, then the universe will neither rip itself apart from expansion nor crunch back together, but will just perfectly expand out and just settle the waters. And that's the heat death. And that's where we measure the cosmological constant today. It seems like exactly on the heat death scenario.
How did this number get discovered? And also, what is it? Because I'm still struggling to understand.
Yeah, well, it's just a number. It's between 0 and 1. But but we can measure it by checking of course, when we look out into space, the further we look out, the more time it must have taken for that light to reach us, because light doesn't travel instantly. So when we do look out further into the past, we see that galaxies were closer together, which is crazy because we expect the universe to be infinite. So how was that infinite space smaller, just a smaller infinity kind of thing back then? But that's a tangent. And essentially, that constant is just a reflection of the difference between how small the universe was previously and how big, or I guess a better word is sparse, how sparse it is today.
So are we kind of measuring the rate in which the universe is expanding?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And it has to be perfect. And is there a possibility that, depends if you believe in the multiverse theory, but is there a possibility that that number is so perfect that if every potential multiverse has its own specific number that's perfect, or that's just a number that has to be perfect in every multiverse?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah. Truthfully, I don't know the answer to it, but it is like nearly exact for this universe at the very least. Any deviation and the universe would have an end, which is quite interesting, because where it is right now, it doesn't seem the universe has an end in terms of time.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on the multiverse theory?
Well, it's beautiful, of course, especially taking into consideration the interpretations of quantum mechanics, where every choice like spawns another reality. I mean, that could a parallel universe or alternate timeline. They're essentially the same concept, but psychologically or philosophically, I think it's critical that we take more attention to whatever universe we're in, of course, which is less exciting. But I think it is like a really important physiological consequence to take it into account. That are we imagining a universe beyond this one because we're like uncontent with this one, or we want to believe in a purpose or a greater reality outside the self? What's wrong with the one we're in?
Yeah. I get that. But like I'm not sure how I would view this. It's more like I think how many dimensions are needed in order for an atom to be stable. I think it's 12.
Oh yeah, that's in string theory. That requires a couple more dimensions.
String, bosonic, and Higgs. Oh yeah, but like through the understanding of like dimensions, wouldn't there also be a possibility that through these dimensions we are able to have alternate dimensions in an alternate universe? I guess is the question.
In some sense, yeah. But the problem with that is we kind of use the word dimension in two ways. There's the way that we use it in like movies and video games, where it's kind of like another realm, so to speak.
Yeah.
But we also, but the formal version of dimension that a physicist or a mathematician will use is less magical than like another realm. It simply means like an independent degree of freedom, and we have 3 independent degrees of spatial freedom in our universe and 1 independent degree of temporal freedom, or the order of causality of freedom. And that's why we say we have 3 dimensions of space, 1 dimension of time. And together they're 4D. But that's only taking into account if we're only talking about degrees of freedom when it comes to space and time. But we can have other degrees of freedom that are more abstract. And for example, like literally basically any aspect of life can be a degree of freedom. Like how happy are you on a scale of 1 to 10? That's a degree of freedom. So there's a dimension of happiness there.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that's what connects like the mystical side of using the word dimension to the physical side is literally speaking, like happiness is its own dimension. So is pleasure and pain and all the emotions.
Yeah. Interesting. And what do you, kind of going back to death, what do you think happens when we die? If we do go into nothingness, do we like go into another dimension? Do we kind of go into another life? Is it like what are your thoughts on it? What happens after?
Well, I love, as above, so below. The mutually opposites infinities seem to be equivalent. The alpha and the omega, negative infinity and positive infinity, behave like identical. In fact, they're probably much like negative and positive zero. It's the same number. So similarly, if we map such a scale to like a human life, I think the beginning and the end are not so different. And we can see this when it comes to imagining what we were before birth. Well, we weren't, right? We weren't anything. So we went from nothing to something, and it was kind of two scenarios. Either you go from something to nothing or something to something. If we go from something to something, then there's no problem there. Great, we still are. But if we go from something to nothing, even then that leads to something, because if we went from nothing to something to nothing, we can kind of visually represent this. We go from nothing to nothing. We're back where we started. And the reason we're back where we started, and they're not two different nothings, is because if they were two different nothings, then there'd be something to compare about them. So one of them must not be something, or must be something, because you can only compare somethingnesses to other somethingnesses. Nothing cannot be compared with itself. So any nothing that happens is the same nothing. So we go from nothing to nothing, then that's already a loop. We've entered a sort of cyclical reincarnation. So either after death, we lead to something, or after death, we lead to nothing, then to something. So either way, it ultimately leads to something.
Something. Okay. Yeah. And what are your thoughts on like your having a soul and how the soul links to like your mind and living?
Yeah. I love the word soul. It, of course, as I kind of mentioned, the soul and breath kind of came from the same word. And those were really early words for consciousness before we had the word consciousness. And today, quite a few people have forgotten that, especially the people that it matters. Like a lot of psychologists don't believe in a soul. It's like, you're joking, right? Because the soul literally means conscious, and you study conscious. You've forgotten what the word soul means, anyway. But yeah, precisely that. When it comes to the soul, the consciousness, the essence of our identity, and what makes us alive today, I think it is safe to say. In fact, I would posit, and I know it is safe to say that continues after death, because it is not a thing. It's not an object, but the subject to whom which objects occurs. As this experience of consciousness we're having right now, we are not an object, but a subject to whom which objects occur. So upon death, all of the objects within it will kind of return to the water, so to speak. From our eyes, we'll see the vision of the world fade into darkness and our sound fade into silence. These objects within our consciousness will fade back into the void in which it came from our eyes. But the consciousness lives on because it's not a thing, and thus nothing can be taken away from it. But we can inflate the mind for consciousness, and the mind is not consciousness, but the mind is the mirror upon which we see the reflection of consciousness. And so if we imagine all of space and time being nothing but, let's just call it the field, the great universal field of the universe, the vacuum, the void, which all things reside within. And since we are part of that as the universe, then there's some mechanism in the universe for that field to reflect onto itself, so that field, as the universe, can be aware of itself, this field of awareness. And so it's not that consciousness is any object within that field, but is the field itself. And the mind is like that mirror upon which the universe can see its own reflection. So upon death, the consciousness is not dying. It is the mind and body which do. And we won't see our reflection. To our views and mind, well, we won't have one, but we won't have our self-awareness anymore. we'll have awareness still, but no self-awareness. So the consciousness continues.
Because there's no self, technically.
Right.
But yeah, that's very interesting.
So is self-actualization the realizing of this before we die? Is that
Precisely.
makes a lot of sense. Hey, what's your relationship with the occult? Because I noticed you had a video where you broke down Pythagoras's painting and all the different symbologies and that sort of thing. What do you think that these old mystics were trying to communicate with these symbols?
Well, typically I feel like I think cutting out. You still hear me?
Yeah, we can hear now. It's coming back.
Great. Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of the occult and mysticism is kind of like a side quest. It's like just having fun, but it's still kind of a part of the story. And there's a lot of these like off branches. If we imagine like, let's suppose, just for the sake of argument, there's like this great path, which is this self-actualization, self-realization. That's the main quest. It's so energetic, like a river, that anyone who enters this stream can easily get shot off. And I feel like a lot of these like religions and ideologies are kind of just like offshoots of that. They go and create their own kind of expression of self actualization, such as like the Freemasons and the Pythagoreans and you name it, the Jains, the Hindus, the Buddhists. All of these are just expressions of this ultimate path.
True. Interesting. And I wanted to ask you this before, actually. Where do you think mankind began to learn mathematics, or what taught us mathematics? Because I think mathematics is a very complex concept. Like, it's very difficult, like, for us to just kind of wake up one morning and just kind of think that, you know, like this, we can use numbers to kind of create things.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I just don't see how someone could just wake up one morning and say, oh, okay, cool, I could use this and I could use 1 + 1 to create something, you know? Where do you think that came from?
I know, isn't that hilarious?
Yeah, dude. It blows my mind.
I mean, of course, it sure has snowballed from like keeping tally marks on a rock to keep track of like crop harvests and whatnot. Now we're like calculating the volume of sixth-dimensional hyperspheres and with different laws of physics. It's like I don't know what the use of that is, but yeah, it's very strange how we have this like mechanism within us to understand reality through like symbol manipulation, because that's essentially what mathematics is. I think Terence McKenna talked about this, which is that language and mathematics as a whole is kind of like the synesthesia, like a correlation between one thing and another, where they might be separate things, but we symbolize one with another. We symbolize the set of sounds that is tree with what tree represents, the physical thing or the archetype of which. And similarly, we use like symbols like the plus sign, the equation, and the numerals, to represent like quantity and whatnot, which is such a I also don't understand how we made that connection, how we are able to associate symbols with what the symbols represent. It baffles me as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's beautiful.
Yeah, it is beautiful. It is beautiful. Because if we think about things like, you know, the pyramids and stuff, I think we would have to have like a very deep understanding of just of mathematics. But I just don't see how like would have been able to like create something so perfect to the millimeter,
right.
You know, to the millimeter.
Yeah.
If we didn't understand mathematics, you know, it would be very, very difficult. What are your thoughts on like the pyramids? Who do you think created them, and where did they come from? And then why do we have so many so many similar structures around the globe pointing at the exact same place in the cosmos, or similar place?
Ah, I mean, there's so many things to point to. Like if I made a big statue in my backyard that was like of a material that could last thousands of years, I think someone would come along and look at it and be like, "Oh, look at that! It points to Orion or whatever." But of course, any direction that you point, there is a star.
That's true.
So I'm not so certain that there is a real big significance to the pyramids. That said, I know a lot of people do believe there is, and I think that's important that a lot of people do, because that shows me that there is this this pattern of thought which has existed around the globe, transmitted through society for thousands of years, that there is some significance to the pyramids. There is this deep archetype within us that wants to believe that there is some mystical power. And that itself, whether or not that represents a real truth about the pyramids or not, the very fact that there is that underlying belief about it, I think, is what makes them magical, and a sort of very, very real. I don't want to use the word placebo because that kind of devalues the mysticism, but there is this archetype within our consciousness. But truthfully, I don't think much about the pyramids.
Okay, yeah. Because it seems like, I don't know, I just found it strange how we have such different civilizations or different tribes who also have pyramids, kind of paint a similar story, I guess we would say. In different parts of the world. I think it was China, Turkey, Egypt, Mexico. And it seems like it's always like a similar story where there's like some sort of alien or something along those lines who kind of came down and taught them, gave them all these kind of skills, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
Do you think it is, what are your thoughts on like the possibility of us being alien experiments, I guess, or if being taught by aliens?
Certainly it is possible, but if we break down the symbolism within these stories, because it is like cross-cultural and often appearing at the same point in time across distances where there couldn't have been communication between these two people, yet they all share the same archetypal stories. But the stories themselves kind of tell us what happened on the level that we can understand experientially, which is that there is this group of people or this person who are living life a bit, not very advanced. They're a bit primitive. They're, killing each other and whatnot. And then from up above, this great being or race comes and it works in that direction, that the information is received from above to below. That it's not that they land and then we tell us our knowledge. It's always them from up above transmitting like extra knowledge to us.
Yeah.
So if we like distill that into the symbolism, we find this metaphor. I find that knowledge and understanding comes from above to below, and perhaps this is represented by the Kundalini serpent around the staff of Hermes, and maybe that represents, say, the Messiah's cross, or the spine from the center of knowledge being up here in our human body. But there is this sort of hierarchy of knowledge that happens from above to below, and I think that is truly what should be taken away from these stories of aliens or gods coming from above, right?
That's an awesome perspective, bro.
Awesome perspective, yeah.
Yeah, first time I've heard of that perspective, but it actually makes so much sense.
Yeah.
Do you have any practices in your life where meditation or Kundalini or things of that nature that really help you, I don't know, they sort of balance your lifestyle or help you think or give you insights? What are your practices that you're involved in?
Well, meditation is great. That's for sure. Meditation isn't so important as it is the meditative state that's important, and that you can do that in a variety of ways. Like pretty much anything could be a meditation. Like a morning shower, morning walk, playing a certain sport. But the state of mind one gets in, and not necessarily exactly what the body does, but the special like little sauce that the meditative state creates is that it's essentially a redirection of our awareness from the external world to the internal world. So when we meditate, what do? Maybe we listen to music, we focus on our breath, that directs our sense of sound to a closer source. We close our eyes so that we're no longer seeing at the external world, but the back of our eyelids and the visuals that are being pasted around by our consciousness. And we close our body into a little mountain, a little ball, where we hold our hands and our legs stuck each other under. We're directing our sense of feeling under. So in meditation, what we're doing is all of our senses we're directing inwards. And I think ultimately it's for answering the cosmic question of who am I? What is this? Because the source in which we understand everything and perceive this universe is here. It's our consciousness which allows this experience of existence to happen. So if we center the consciousness on itself, it's like boom, some crazy stuff happens. You get revelation, you work through some deep trauma, maybe you get a great idea for creation, you find satisfaction, fulfillment, relaxation, contentment. All of it happens. This nucleus of focus that happens when we center our awareness inwards instead of outwards.
Well, what do you think a human being is and the meaning of our existence?
Oh, that's a great question. I always say to that question that it's the first word which answers that. It's what? Yeah. And what is what, right? Well, what is a question, but what is a question? And a question is, well, again, it's that query from a collection. You wouldn't ask a question about what color the sky was if there was only one option. You just know it would be, well, the sky is the only color that is. So the very fact that we can ask the question, what color is the sky, implies the existence of multiplicity and manyness. It is an initiation of the unknown. It's this creation of a space for possibility and something filling that. It's the law of attraction. So by asking the question, what is the purpose of humanity or life or the meaning of it all, it kind of answers itself, because the ability to ask is the ability to create that vacancy and initiation for truth and greater purpose and select from the multiplicity of the universe. So what is the question and the answer?
Dude, that's the best answer I've ever heard to that question. Oh, wow. How old are you, bro?
I love this question. I find it really interesting for some reason. Like, the atoms within my body, of course, are 13.7 billion years, and the DNA comprising me is millions to billions as well, and the concepts pervading us as humans have been being grown through society through tens of thousands of years. And but we start counting at birth, which is funny, because why not any of those other times that also constitute our being? And so if we are counting from birth, then I've completed about 20 revolutions of the sun, or about 630 million seconds.
Wow. 20 years old. That's awesome, bro. So do you believe that, or do you have memories of past lives and things of that nature? Do you have any awareness of what was before you were born?
No.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Just in case. Well, what do you think the dream world is?
What do I think the dream world is? Oh, that's a great question. I think to answer that, well, what happens when we go to sleep? It's like that meditation. We're directing the senses inward. We're pacifying the senses so that we're left not with anything external, but only what's internal to us. It's like there's a bunch of different quotes that kind of point to this evidently, like, you only know the faces that you've seen before in your dream. Well, that shows you that your dreams are kind of nothing more than a collection of, or accumulation of, your experience. And I think I like to one of the weirdest analogies that I think really works is the Large Hadron Collider. Smashing particles for 2 years or 4 years together, collecting like terabytes of data by the hour, but then it shuts off, and it has to shut off because it's collected so much data that it needs to go process that data. And I think we see this in pretty much every aspect of the universe, that there's a cycle, an upward cycle of creation, and a downward cycle of like maintenance. And I feel like dreams are that processing of our experience, because like right now in this experience we're accumulating so much data within, I mean, what's the resolution of our vision? It's like beyond 4K, right? And you know how much data is in a 4K video, and similarly all the sounds that's coming into us, and all of our other senses, and we're not processing all of that. We're kind of like storing it. We're like, okay, get it, tuck it in within ourselves, repress it into the subconscious, but it's still there because it arises in our dreams. We have fears that arise that have come from our childhood and whatnot, these experiences and data that we've accumulated. So I feel like the dream world is like accessing these fears and these patterns of thought that have been working their ways within our subconscious, and it's kind of like the warehouse of our consciousness.
Wow.
Yeah.
Do you believe that in dream state or in the dream world we're traveling to a different dimension or place, or is this a fully internal thing somewhere in the subconscious?
Well, from our perspective, it's not like we're going anywhere. It's like it goes to us. And that's actually the premise, of course, of Einstein's relativity. Is the apple falling to Newton's head, or is Newton's head falling to the apple?
Yeah.
And you cannot say for certain that it's either. But what we can say for certain is that to the apple's perspective, Newton's head is coming towards it. Similarly, from our conscious perspective, we're kind of seated in the same place. We've always been in the same place. But like a video game or a top-down game, it's the game which moves around the camera. And similarly, in this day-to-day life, when we're walking around the house and stuff, it's just kind of just feels like it's the house which is like rotating around you, and your body's adapting to it. And likewise, waking state and dream state kind of take place in the same part of our vision, the same part of our conscious experience, that we see the universe taking place in the space when we're awake, but then it kind of transition or changes form from our perspective into the dream world. So they kind of take place within the same space, and we're not really traveling anywhere, but the objects within it are.
It comes back to the whole, like, everything's an illusion. It's just our consciousness interpreting information in a certain way.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's a great interpretation.
Interesting.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
One of your videos, you talked about the monster and something called the E8 or leech lotus in the 8th and 24th dimension. I have no idea. I can't remember all of it.
Yeah.
But what is this monster and this E8?
Well, they're shapes, but they're like really cool shapes. Like a triangle has 3 points and exists in 2 dimensions. The monster has it's like 88 octodecillion points and exists only within 200,000 dimensions.
200,000 dimensions.
Is that
Yeah,
like what you probably like see when you do like shrooms or ayahuasca or something?
Hey, honestly, like it probably
That's what it
pretty
sounds like.
accurate. Yeah. I think there's a MIT did a lecture recently about how psychedelics and DMT specifically kind of activate fractal patterns and this expanding of space into something that looks like hyperbolic space with a lot of symmetries. And that is exactly what you expect the E8 or the leech lattice or the monster to look like. They're highly symmetric. So perhaps indeed that is what we see on psychedelic experiences.
Have you ever done psychedelics or things of that nature?
I've done it a couple times. Yeah, I never had sincere hallucinations. It was definitely more of a headspace. But yeah.
Okay.
Well, what did you take?
I've taken psilocybin, magic mushrooms, of course, and LSD a few times. That was it.
Nice.
Yeah. Also, for me, marijuana itself is like really psychedelic. So I would also consider that personally.
Psychedelic, yeah.
Have you ever had like an out-of-body experience or like a conversation with something that's spiritual that's not you, or anything like that, or is it mainly just your thoughts in these psychedelics experiences?
I couldn't say that it'd be like an out-of-body experience or like another entity, because both of those I feel like are very like dualistic notions. To be out of the body assumes that there is a separation between one and the body, and like another entity also assumes that there is a part of you which is not, which is communicating. And for me, it's always been a very non-dual state on psychedelics. There is no distinction between body, not body, other entity, entity. It's just all one. But probably I've had like thoughts enter my mind which feel like they have not come from myself.
Like a higher mind, or maybe like you're expanding your consciousness to.
Sure. Yeah.
Trying to articulate things, man. But
that's all good. No worries.
There's something I wanted to ask you as well. I've got so many questions here, but you talk about different religions being and different sects being different parts or different paths that just break off. Is there any certain paths that you've followed or you've looked into that have really helped you to navigate your own spiritual journey and make sense of it all?
Well, mathematics has been a big one, which I think is probably a little surprising to a lot of the New Age community. But truly, I think all of them, of course, are quite beautiful, and I've been on many. There seems to be a certain pattern in which it all leads to. Like, I feel like a lot of people get to in life a certain state of nihilism, but that nihilism kind of always leads to solipsism, because nihilism is the kind of understanding, the rejection of the external world, and going, okay, well, I don't know for certain anything at all. I think there's nothing. There's no great purpose. But that leads to something, and always almost the same thing. Nihilists usually always become solipsists, because the solipsist goes, it's not just nothing. You're forgetting something. You're forgetting one thing you know for certain, which is you're here. You don't know what it means to be here, or who you are, or what you are experiencing, but there is an experience of you that's happening. And I think that's where philosophy, that's like a bottleneck of philosophy, kind of eventually leads to a sort of nihilism, and then nihilism leads to a solipsism, and that solipsism is kind of like this bottleneck which sprouts into spirituality, because spirituality, I mean, just linguistically, is the abstraction of the spirit, and the spirit, of course, as we talked about, is the old word for consciousness, or the essence, the sense of self. And so if solipsism leads one back to the sense of self, that is what I know for certain, then we've sparked off the literal the definition of spirituality. And that's which sparks the other isms. That I feel like that leads to Buddhism, and that leads to Jainism and Hinduism, and those kinds of Eastern practices. They are a creation as a result of the bottleneck or the flow of philosophy from the external world back to the inner world.
Enough. Yeah, I get that.
Yeah. That's awesome, man. I had like 3 questions to ask you, but I lost those 3 questions when I was listening to what you were saying, and now
that's okay.
I'm in a state of like contemplation so deeply about the notion of spirituality. That was just so beautifully done.
Yeah.
Wow.
In terms of like, obviously we have like billions of planets, and I think the probability of us not having interacted with some sort of like extraterrestrial race is very, very little.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think there's a possibility that they would have communicated with us already, or they are communicating with us? And what impact would they have possibly have had?
I feel like the chances get a little lower when we take into account how young the universe is. One of my favorite and most convincing arguments, the Fermi paradox, is that we're on like the first generation of planets like ever. Because we've had 3 generations of stars, roughly. You know, not every star is the same age, but the first 2 generations couldn't produce planets, and we're on the first generation of planets. And there's expected to be like tens of thousands, if not trillions, of generations of planets and generations of stars, and we're on a 3rd generation solar system of the 100 trillion generations of solar systems that will be. So it's actually like insanely nuts of how young we are in the universe. If there is expected to be civilizations across that whole timeline of the universe, then we're in the first like 0.000000001% of all the civilizations that will ever be. We may just be one of the first ever. But truthfully, even though we are only the 3rd generation planet, again, there are a lot of planets.
Yeah.
And so that all makes the percentage a little higher. But putting those 2 ideas of the fact that there's so many planets, but we're also one of the first planets, then that tells us that because we don't have the technology to communicate with other planets yet, then we shouldn't necessarily expect others to either, because we've only had radio for the past roughly 100, 200 years. So that means we could only have communicated with any solar system within 200 light years, and we've only ever been trying for the last like 50 years. So that shrinks the bubble down to 50 light years. So because all of the planets kind of started existing at the same time, every single planet that's out there that could have a civilization can only communicate with the stars that are about 50 light years away from that. And there's only like 10. There's only like 10 solar systems within that range. And so now the chances of communication are like 1 in 10. So that is a little depressing, but I think is the best resolution to the paradox.
Yeah, interesting.
Can you tell us a little bit about... No, sorry, man. You
No, go for it.
Yeah. A little bit about time travel. And do you think it's possible to actually time travel, or does light time travel and things of that nature?
Yeah, one of my favorite facts in physics is the concept of the 4 vector, that if our universe is 3 dimensions of space and 4 dimensions of time, and we're constantly moving through space and time, then every one of these everything in this universe has a direction in which it goes through space-time as a whole. And it turns out that the speed of that throughout the whole of space-time is always the speed of light for everything. So it's not that the speed of light is the maximum speed, it's the only speed, just divvied out in some combinations of through time or through space. So for us right now, since we're not moving through space, we're moving through time at the speed of light. And because light moves through space at the speed of light, then it's not moving through time at all. So light doesn't experience any time. They exist like entirely perpendicular to us in space-time. And antimatter, when we do the calculation for what direction it's pointing through space-time, it's backwards comparison to ours. So we do experience particles coming from the future all the time. That's with the advent of the discovery of antimatter, because antimatter is mathematically equivalent to regular matter, except the only difference is that it's traveling backwards through time. It's just that we don't experience it going backwards in time because we're going forwards with it. But while we're going forwards, we're actually seeing slices of it within the past, technically a younger version of it. And I wish physicists would talk about this more. They're like, oh yeah, they like hide it under layers of terminology. It's like, oh yeah, it's called charge parity time symmetry, and so we expect antimatter, which to be symmetric through time. But it's like, just say it how it is. They're going backwards through time. Things are going forwards and backwards and sideways through time all throughout the universe. But
why do you reckon they avoid talking about that?
Because I don't think they believe it. Because it's these are things that arise within the mathematics, and I think they just chalk it down. They say what I said, which is it's mathematically equivalent to it, which is like, I guess, more humble. but truthfully, it's not that like 2 + 2 is mathematically equivalent to 4. Like it is 4, right? So whenever we have an equal sign, I see it as like that's what's happening, and we have an equal sign to matter and antimatter being described in terms of going forwards and backwards in time. So I feel like it is, but that's more of a philosophical debate at that point.
It's interesting because it reminds me of like scientists who are like devout Christians who are looking through telescopes, looking back in time millions and millions of years, and they believe that the universe was created 6,000 years ago according to the Old Testament. But they know that that's not true because there's planets they're looking at that are millions of years old. Like how do they do this, you know?
Well, I mean, we can get really creative with the arguments. Like maybe the speed of light's changed. I know actually a lot of creationists believe that the speed of light is variable, and so that would affect the calculations of how old things are when it comes to how long the light took to get us. But at that point, I feel like it's like you're looking for a reason to put the Old Testament first and trying to match science to the Old Testament.
It's a big problem, I suppose, though.
It's a big assumption, you know.
Yeah.
It's like confirmation bias at that point.
Yeah, heavily. I got to compliment you, man, on your style, your dressing downs and the lights and the sunglasses. It's actually fucking awesome.
I appreciate
that. Swagger, dude.
Yeah, I'd love to be in the studio you guys are in. Oh yeah, this is a Jedi robe actually. You can get it on Amazon.
Yeah, it looks. Is it velvet?
Jedi symbol. Velvet, I wish, but it is very soft. I don't know what material.
Oh, it looks pretty snazzy.
Yeah, man. I'm actually gonna get one. I'm gonna invest.
Great. Yeah. No, you have a robe that you just live in.
You
do less laundry.
Yeah. All right, that's what we've got here. Have you ever had an experience where you've actually exited the simulation in some respect through meditation or psychedelics or?
Well, I think the interesting realization that a lot of people have is that they were never in it.
Oh, yeah.
That it's like if you get sucked into playing a video game, or maybe a better example now with modern technologies is VR, and you take the goggles off. It's not like it'd be less accurate to say you've escaped it because you were never in it. But what we really mean when we say we escape it is we stop identifying within it. So if you're playing as, I don't know, some anime girl in a VR chat game, and you really identify with that character, you're kind of in the game because you've identified, you've attached yourself to this persona. So escaping it is the detachment or de-identification with it. So all it really takes to escape the simulation is identify with the fact that you're not in it. But not only does that have to happen on an intellectual level, but it has to happen on an experiential level, because a lot of simulation theorists already believe this, but they haven't experienced it. And I think the best way to experience it is to notice that in your surroundings right now, in this conscious experience, all these objects within the room are objects within your experience, within your consciousness right now. Not because they're actually like within it, in your brain. They're just within this field of consciousness are the objects of this experience. And because you are the consciousness and not any object within it, then that means it is the world which is contained within you. So there's nothing to escape because you're already the outermost layer.
That's true. If all these objects in our surroundings, are internal, why do they cost money? why do we have to pay for these things?
Right? Yeah.
It's not like, do you reckon it's like our beliefs that are shaping this world, like that I have to pay, or can you break down this illusion that we're living in to suit better your needs?
Yeah, if I think
Like manifestations and things like that. How much power of the mind do we really have over our reality?
Oh, I've so much power, but
Yeah.
I don't think we want that power because it's the limitations which kind of which make it interesting. Like we call someone creative if they have the ability to think outside the box, but in order to think outside the box, you must first be confined to a box, right?
True.
Like my favorite thought experiment is the one if we gave an artist everything they wished for, every type of paint, acrylic, oil, you name it. You gave them charcoal, you gave them every type of weighted canvas, you gave them a big warehouse of all the supplies and an infinite amount of time for them to create stuff. You open the doors, you push them in, you get them experienced or aware of all the things they now have, and you tell them, go create something. That'll be the hardest decision that artist has ever made, which is crazy because that's kind of what we want to pursue the things we want to do. We want the tools to do them. But as soon as we have all the tools to do them, we no longer have a box to think outside of. And if we take that same artist and we put him in a garage and we give him maybe just 2 watercolor brushes and we tell him, I want you to paint me what you feel like envy looks like, he'll probably start right away. It'll be a much easier decision. So similarly, although we are, in our identity, the universe, not even in part, but in entirety, we limit ourselves consciously for the sake of art, for the sake of creation. And so if we don't have the power over something, then that's because we don't want it. We want to be limited for the sake of overcoming it, or for the sake of art, or for the sake of fun.
Beautiful.
So there's definitely a higher part of ourselves that we're not fully communicating with, that is making decisions beyond our control for us to sort of enjoy or create.
Certainly.
Yeah.
The mind will have trouble understanding this because the mind is lower on the hierarchy. But because the mind is the highest in terms of its awareness, then it won't be able to understand what's above. And that's where a lot of us get stuck upon this concept of a higher self. We don't believe in it, not because we don't experience it, but because the mind cannot experience it. And so the mind tells itself, it's like, oh, I'm the mind and that's it. And we, which are the higher self, we are the higher self. It's not separate from us. We hear the mind tell itself, I'm the mind. And so we get confused. Like if I had someone in my company named Jerry, and Jerry was always telling me I'm an astronaut, and he would remind me with every chance I got, be like, hey, I'm an astronaut. Guess what? I'm an astronaut. I'm an astronaut. Eventually, hearing that for so long, I'd start to think I'm an astronaut because the words within my consciousness would constantly be replaying, I'm an astronaut. And it is true that Jerry's an astronaut. And it is true that I'm constantly hearing Jerry tell me that I'm an astronaut. Similarly, it is true that the mind is the mind. When I say the words, I'm the mind, it's true because the mind is the one who said that. But our true selves, beyond the mind, hear this and get confused with it, and they hear the mind tell itself, I'm the mind, and we start to identify it with it.
Damn.
How would you link that to the law of attraction?
Oh, the law of attraction is beautiful.
Yeah, correlate with the law of attraction.
Mm-hmm. I think, imagine a soccer field which was infinite, or it doesn't have to be infinite. Just imagine a soccer field out in the open, and there's a soccer ball somewhere on it, and there's a hole on the field, and there's wind. So we have a soccer field. It's windy. There's a hole somewhere on the field. And there's a soccer ball. After some time, we should expect the soccer ball to fall within that hole. The law of entropy, things eventually lead to lower energy states. We dig a bigger hole, one more so fitting for the soccer ball. We should find more likely that soccer ball to eventually fall in that hole. So although I come out into this big field and I might not know how to get the soccer ball physically, I can prepare a vacancy for it so that it can be fulfilled by it. And I think the law of attraction is not so different on the level of the mind. We create a vacancy for something, and by the laws of Newton's second law of thermodynamics, we should expect vacancies to be filled. Nature abhors vacuum. We've been taught this since a kid when we see holes shaped in a star, and we have our little star shape and we fit it in. It's just satisfying to the universe to fill holes. Name your favorite innuendo. Ultimately, that's the law of attraction. We create a vacancy in our mind for it, and something fills that.
Interesting. I never thought about it like that.
Creating vacancies.
Right. Yeah. And how do you prevent how do you get out of you? How do you prevent the ego from? How do you prevent the ego from kind of getting in the way of that?
You can't. Really. But fortunately, somehow or another, there are these kind of patterns of thought which we communicate through each other through either sharing of videos or sharing of conversations, which work our way around the globe through communities and whatnot. And who knows where these patterns of thought come from? But there are certain patterns of thought which are liberating, and they liberate us when we hear them. Eventually, someone will come up to you who has received this pattern of energy, and they're in a good mood, and they want to relay that onto you, and they tell you, like, hey, you look beautiful today. You look very distinguished, and I'm really proud of you, and you are exactly where you meant to be. Who knows where that pattern of energy came from? Maybe it was created by them, or maybe they're just passing it on. But it's those natural forces which flow throughout society, which are what causes cessation to the ego and causes a settlement of the mind. And so it's not ourselves which produce these patterns, but we're simply receptacles for them. And we simply must wait until they pass us by again. And that is when the ego leaves for a while or returns to the background.
Yeah. And how would you define the ego?
The I. Whoever you think you are, that's your ego.
Okay.
Whatever sense of identity you have, that's the ego.
So would you say the I and the ego and the self are separate, or the ego is the self?
So somewhere on this phone, there's an ID number. There's actually a couple different IDs. You could consider the phone number, the ID, the model number, or the software number, or the you name it. There's a bunch of like identification codes associated with this phone, but none of them are the phone itself. Yet they identify the phone. Similarly, with this like body-mind complex, we have a bunch of like identities which each identify this system, but are not the system itself. So our name identifies us, but it is not us. Who we think we are identifies us, but it's not us. Our occupation, everything we attach ourselves to are like little concentrations or symbols of us, but these symbols are not us themselves. And so the self is the whole system, but the I is like the symbol which represents it.
Beautiful.
Man, that's
a very well.
Do you have time for one more question?
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Okay. Because what do you think a black hole is? And I remember seeing a video where you were talking about a sun existing within a black hole, or am I misinterpreting your video?
Yeah. It's the old quasi-star.
Yeah. So
is that possible?
What is a black hole, and how would a sun even exist within one? Like, do you have any ideas on this mathematically or through your research?
There's so many ways to explain a black hole, but none of them are like ever satisfying. I think a whirlpool is like an all right example. A whirlpool, at some point in a whirlpool, you get too close. You could never you could never go faster or fast enough to escape the whirlpool. You'll get sucked in because you've reached like terminal velocity, because the water itself is moving faster than anything within the water is capable of. And that's kind of like a 2D example. And there's a kind of like an equivalent 3D version. And we cannot really imagine it perfectly because the whirlpool example really only made sense because we had a third dimension to be a bird's eye view to visualize it properly. But similarly, a black hole, instead of the water, it's space itself. And there's just this certain region of space-time which is being sucked towards a single geometric point, or sometimes it's a ring. But anyway, in any case, it's this spot within it that's being sucked within. And it's being sucked at such a speed that anything near it cannot reach the terminal velocity to escape it. And so it could never, theoretically, unless it itself gets destroyed, anything that gets past that threshold, which we call the event horizon, could never be seen again. So, classic saying, not even light can escape it. But Roger Penrose, who was recently awarded the Nobel Prize for kind of discovering it through mathematics itself, like 50 years ago. He got the prize recently because we finally got a photograph of one that proved it finally.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting that
50
we
years
decided to award him. Yeah, it might have even been more than that.
Yeah.
But he proved it to himself within the equations of Einstein's relativity. And it kind of showed him that there's more than just the remnants of a supernova, because that's one way we know how they happen, but what they are is truly magical. He saw that there's this certain kind of equation that we can use to understand what happens inside of it, because mathematicians are built different a little bit, and they can just go inside of it within their mind. They don't have to physically go inside of it. And within it, he found that if we extend these equations of the universe and follow what happens within it, then we should expect in a black hole, there's this infinitely dense point. Sure, that's fine. But something interesting happens if the black hole is rotating. That point, that infinitely dense point, turns into a circle, a ringularity it's called. And within that ringularity, and within the black hole as a whole, space and time swap. There's no longer 3 dimensions of space and 1 dimension of time. There's 3 dimensions of time and 1 dimension of space. Figure out what that means. I don't know, but what I do know is you'd have to wear 3 watches at all times, 1 for each dimension. And after entering the black hole, you'd see, only if it's rotating, which is really weird, only if it's rotating, then you'd see other universes leading into a black hole, and the black hole itself would be leading into multiple wormholes. And inside each of these wormholes, you would see this membrane, which is that comprises the ringularity. And the membrane separates these so-called antiverses, and you could not go through it. But it would be a barrier. It's this like heartbreaking barrier between universes that you could never cross this membrane. But indeed, that is like this wall that separates universes. And if you were to touch this wall, you'd be like accumulated into the wall itself, and you would become the wall. But you could never pass through it. But that's kind of the wall, and it's not the end of the wormhole. That's kind of what comprises it. But if you keep going down the wormhole, you'll eventually lead into a white hole. And this white hole is much like the black hole, except it works in reverse. Things can come into a black hole and not out. But things can come out of a white hole and not in. And this white hole would lead to, yet again, more universes, parallel universes. So it's very strange that mathematically, at the center of a regular black hole, there's nothing but a single point. There's this mysterious point called the singularity. That's it. But if we spin it, and we then go in. It's like this hub between the multiverse, which is
Wow.
exciting.
Wow. I have never heard that. Just blew my mind. Gonna have to research it,
I know, right? Yeah, it's quite exciting.
Hopefully they send someone into a black hole and see what happens, but you never find out.
You never find out.
Different universe,
They're pretty sure they pass away. Do you think there's ever a possibility of us like understanding mathematics to such a depth where we'd be able to like cross through the black hole and back, having the technological capability to do that?
I think it is possible, especially if we think about antimatter, which is just regular matter, but going backwards in time. If we can somehow find a mechanism to convert ourselves into antimatter when we are within the black hole, then we would leave the black hole because we would be going backwards in time. Thus, we can't escape the black hole because, according to the universe, even though to our perspective we're going out of it, because we're going backwards in time, it's as if we were going into it further. So we can kind of take advantage of the fact that antimatter is going backwards through time in order to escape one. I think that's the only possibility to actually escape one.
So that therefore mean like the only possibility for us to travel to other galaxies would be to utilize antimatter in some way, some form.
I think so. Yeah, that's the whole concept. The wormhole or the warp drive ties into that. You need something exotic like that to take advantage of.
Yeah. Because otherwise, if the only limit is speed, if you can only travel at the speed of light, we would never be able to get there. It would take thousands. Of years.
Yeah, it's surprisingly slow, the speed of light.
yeah, which is quite interesting. Damn, you're gonna go look into that.
For someone starting on their journey in mathematics and spirituality, were there any books or people you'd recommend to follow or buy or purchase to really go down the rabbit hole and spark the mind?
Well, on the assumption that there is this great truth to uncover, or multiple truths, or no truths at all, whatever natural mechanisms allow the universe to exist, they should be universal. Like, this concept of universal truth is universal because it's all pervasive. It's omnipresent, such as why we associate and personify truth with God. And one of the attributes of God, we say, is omnipresent, which means he's found within everything homogeneously. And so because of that, we should expect to find truth in everything, within any book you pick up. But most importantly, you do not even need an external object at all. All of it should be within you, because you are the universe. Thus, any secrets of the universe should be baked into your being by being the universe. So I probably wouldn't recommend a book or a movie or anything. If anything, I'd recommend an empty one so that you can write your own.
That's good. Yeah.
Needed a round of applause.
That's dope. I love that. Do you write a lot yourself?
I don't actually, which is funny.
Yeah.
I'll buy you a blank.
Oh, beautiful.
Okay. Now there's one question I forgot to ask you, and that was chaos theory.
Yeah.
What is chaos theory?
Chaos theory is beautiful. That's what it is. Chaos theory is the reason we can't predict the weather accurately after 7 days. We have a 1 week forecast, and after a week, it's like, okay, maybe we can say there's a 10% chance of rain. Even on like today's forecast, we can only have a percentage chance of rain. And of course, like we just can't take into account like every single particle of the atmosphere, because every single particle is like significant, which is what makes chaos theory beautiful. Is it tells us that when we have a system where everything's so interconnected that a tiny change of anything creates change in the whole system, then every part of that system has this like power, equal creative power. No one is insignificant in this. And the atmosphere is like that. A single atom will change the forecast. A single atom changed 1 millimeter to the left will make next week's forecast completely different. Maybe there'll be a tsunami somehow through some chain of events. And I think chaos theory, it's called chaos theory because it's such a system is called chaotic when you can't predict it, or you would require like super conscious level of understanding to be able to take into account all of that level of self-interaction. So we call it chaotic. But chaos theory is how we produce fractals, because fractals are inherently self-symmetric, self-interacting kind of algorithms, which produce these beautiful imagery like the Mandelbrot set and like ferns and trees, and the universe itself is a chaotic system. And so I think chaos theory is the study of all that, the study of when you have self-interaction, and that self-interaction sparking beautiful dynamicism.
Beautiful. And where can people find you? On social media and things like that? Anything you got going on or coming up or creating at the moment?
Well, you can find me at Yamsocks on TikTok, YAMSOX. I also have a website that I need to pay for. Due date's coming up today, I think, which is yamsocks.ca. And there I have my links to all my social media and all of my projects. So that's kind of the hub for it.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Dude, thank you so much.
Yeah.
That was incredible conversation, man.
Yeah. Just gonna go
thank
fly
you.
in my
You guys
bed,
have great
just think about
questions.
shit. Yeah.
I'm still spinning. I'm spinning out for at least a few weeks now to bring this down. I feel like I've leveled up in quite a tremendous way. So I'm so glad I get to share this with my audience and with the world and see where it takes us.
Yeah.
Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah. Thank you for having this
fascinating.
with me.
No worries at all, brother. Oh man, so grateful, bro.
Yeah.